It's been a few years since Wario's had a game of his own, so to make up for lost time, he's brought more than a dozen of them with him in the form of Game Wario for the Wii U. Okay, so maybe these games aren't exactly full games, but they're also not the microgames Wario's perhaps best known for. Instead, they're somewhere in between, sort of like a Wario version of Nintendo Land, complete with both single-player and multiplayer-focused attractions. And like Nintendo Land, each one of them is based around a simple concept that involves the gamepad in some unique way. In fact, this time around, you'll only ever be using the gamepad. Take the game Arrow for example, where you use the gamepad as a bow and arrow to hold off an invading army of motorized Warios, which you do by physically moving the gamepad to aim, then firing arrows from it into the TV. It's a little like Takamaru's Ninja Castle in Nintendo Land, except that the action will also move to the gamepad itself if you let the Warios get too close, in which case you'll have to squish little Warios with your finger to prevent them from damaging you. Then there's Taxi, in which you have to drive around and shoot down small UFOs to prevent them from kidnapping citizens, which you then have to drop off at a safe location. You are a taxi service after all, and this is all before a giant UFO attacks the city that you'll have to shoot down quickly. Now in this game, you'll primarily play on the TV, using it as a map to get around, but you'll also have to use a gamepad in order to actually target the UFOs, which you do by aiming the gamepad from a first-person perspective. And in another game, fittingly called Gamer, you'll take control of the Nintendo Loving 9V as you essentially play two games at once. On the gamepad, you'll have to tackle a series of WarioWare-style microgames culminating in a boss fight, all the while keeping an eye on the TV in order to slip under the covers before 9V's mom catches him playing games way past his bedtime. It's pretty crazy as you have to rapidly switch focus from the gamepad to the TV and back again while avoiding losing at either of the games. And of course there are still 9 other games I could talk about, but that would take a really long time, and it also wouldn't really add much because I feel basically the same way about all of them. And in that respect, all 12 of the single-player games are remarkably consistent in quality, except that they're consistently mediocre. Each of the 12 single-player games offers a shallow and bare-bones experience that I found to be only mildly entertaining at first. And even that feeling quickly eroded as the novelty of each one wore off, leaving me with no lasting desire to revisit most of them. The fact remains that a couple of the games here are just reskins of E3 demos from a few years ago, and it shows, being no more fun now than they were then. And they weren't very fun then either. And the ones that aren't demos, which to be fair is most of them, feel like they could have been. Even Bird, a simple Game & Watch style game which also might be the best of the 12 games here, is just a remake of one from WarioWare 10 years ago and fares little better. With all that being said, I do have to give props to the game's presentation, which exudes a ton of personality between the comical cutscenes, fun menus, and the brilliant title screen art for each of the games that evokes memories of the Atari 2600 era. Not that I'm old enough to remember those days or anything, but seriously, that artwork might actually be my favorite part of the single-player experience. Unfortunately, it's not quite enough to make up for the overall lacking gameplay, and that's why I'm giving the single player 2.5 stars out of 5. But wait, there's more, specifically a multiplayer mode, and it's a lot better in that it's actually pretty fun. Now, although there are only 4 multiplayer exclusive games, I found every one of them to be more enjoyable than any of the single player offerings. Take Fruit for example, where the gamepad player has to sneak around and steal fruit while blending in with the other townsfolk to avoid being spotted by the other players watching the TV, who will then have to pick him out from a lineup afterward. This is a supremely clever use of the gamepad, though it is a little unbalanced and that it's quite a bit more fun to be the thief than the other more passive participants. Fortunately, the Islands game is equally fun for everyone as you take turns launching pieces from the gamepad onto a board in the form of islands in order to land in high-scoring areas. But things can quickly get crazy between shifting islands and point positions, plus the fact that you can purposely screw over an opponent by knocking their pieces into the water. Oh, and then there's a seagull who you will run to fear as he randomly messes with one of the players between rounds. And then we have what might be my favorite of the games, Sketch, which challenges you to a Pictionary-style draw-off where players take turns drawing pictures while everyone else attempts to guess what that picture is. Now, if you played Pictionary before, then you probably already know how fun this can be, and it's a great use for the gamepad. But like with the single-player games, there still isn't a ton of depth or even options to help mix things up, so even they're not quite as replayable as they could be. We should also mention that the games we mentioned here are best played with at least 3 players, as the 2-player versions are either crippled like in Sketch, where it turns into a cooperative experience, or simply just aren't as much fun. But that being said, the multiplayer games are undoubtedly the highlight of Game & Wario for me, offering 4 different games that are all easy to get into and fun for players of all skill levels. And that's why I'm giving the multiplayer half 3.5 stars out of 5. Thanks for watching, and make sure to keep an eye on GameXplain.com for more reviews and other things gaming too. You can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter at GameXplain to keep up with our latest videos.